And 70s, it was a period of agrarian reform and post-agrarian reform. So it was a very interesting period because the communities were freed, and there were other institutions working with communities, as the Misión Andina, and the Summer Institute of Linguistics in the Amazon, and they were working with the communities, and it was feeding a process of ethnogenesis in the communities. And then the communities within the haciendas were able to rearticulate themselves and to move, to make contacts between or among communities, and even to travel to the coast in order to work and establish in there. So the first indigenous organizations' main claims were the land, culture, and identity. So until this moment, there were some organizations, indigenous organizations, but subsumed within the leftist political parties, within the Socialist Party, Ecuadorian Party, and the Communist Social Party. And there was the more known organization of this period is the Federación Ecuatoriana de Indios, so the Ecuadorian Indian Federation, which was part of the Communist Party. But there were many tensions with leftist leaders. So, and then in this period when the law of agrarian reform came to practice, so the indigenous just organized themselves under different ideas than the leftist interests. So, so the core ideas of the new organizations, or the first indigenous organizations, was land, culture, and identity. So within these claims, the indigenous education, called the Kikin Yachay, the educación propia, right, was highly desired, and it was part of the starting agenda of different organizations in different levels. So there were federal province federations, and the Corunari, which was a highland regional organizations. It's Ecuador Unaconapa Richarimuy, which is the awakening of indigenous peoples of Ecuador. And then in the Amazon, the Federación Shuar, the Shuar Federation, and it was very early in the 1960s. And all of these organizations were interested in education. So in the Shuar Federation, for example, they started very early in the 60s a huge project of education by using the radio, with support of missionaries and Salesian missionaries and other missions located in the Amazon. So in 1979, there is what is called the return to democracy. So there were many dictatorships before this year, and then there are a political campaign in the country, and the indigenous organizations are very active in political negotiations with the presidential candidates. What we're negotiating, especially the access to land and the bilingual education. So Jaime Roldós won the elections, and very early in the 1980s, 5 institutos normales bilingües. So it is a kind of institutions in charge of educating young people for being teachers. So institutos normales bilingües were created within the indigenous territories and the indigenous communities. It's the first time we have this kind of institution. So just to see, yes, this is the Instituto Normal Bilingüe, Jaime Roldós. It's located in the central Ecuador. This is the Instituto Normal Bilingüe Quilloag in southern Ecuador, yeah, and Instituto Normal Canelos in northern Amazon, Instituto Normal Bomboiza, it's a Shuar people institute located in the southern Amazon. And then this is the Instituto Normal Marta Roldós. It's located in Limoncocha. It's in the middle of the jungle in the central Amazon. So this was the place where the institute, the Summer Institute of Linguistic people were working for many years just in the middle of the jungle. Yeah, so, and then these constructions and buildings were used to work with this institute. Yeah, it is a Quechua region. Yeah, in 1980s, the Instituto Normal Bilingüe's role, yeah, where it was assumed that, yeah, so in 1980s, so we have already the Institutos Normales Bilingües, and these institutes had a specific role or function within the education for indigenous peoples. So it was, at that moment, it was assumed that the indigenous language needed to be maintained. So it was supposed the language were not endangered, and the only thing needed was to train the Quechua young people just to teach the language and maintain them. So it was opened for indigenous students only. So at least this was the idea of in the moment of creating these institutes. Yeah, for indigenous students only, and the bilingualism, the sense of bilingualism was not a function of the institutes, but it was considered that the bilingualism come from home, so from the students' home. So the bilingualism was a requirement to be accepted in this institute. So the institutional role was focused on pedagogical training. And then the curriculum was the same as the urban normals, and the indigenous language were treated as a foreign language status, so 2-3 hours per week. Okay, so in 1988, so it was created the Dirección Nacional de Educación Intercultural Bilingüe. That's the National Directorate of Bilingual Education, DNAIB, and it was created as a part of the Ministry of Education. Yeah, it was as a part of the agreement between the Ministry of Education and the Confederación de Nacionalidades Indígenas, which is the largest organization in the country. So the schools along the country were divided in two different jurisdictions. Yeah, the Educación Hispana, and Hispanic Education, and the Educación Bilingüe Intercultural, yeah, the Bilingual Intercultural Education. So it was territorially divided, the schools in the country. So it was actually a problematic issue. I worked more than 10 years within this system, and this division was a problem. So this institution was articulated the local and experimental projects of bilingual education in the country. So before the DNAIB, there were many very focalized and limited projects throughout the country, in the Amazon, in the highlands. There were many projects, private or projects led by non-governmental organizations, ONGs. And then the DNAIB was decentralized and autonomous, I told you before. So it means that they had state money and to administrate and by themselves. The administration was decentralized, the curriculum design and the language policies and the educational resources production. So textbooks, etc. were prepared by people working in the DNAIB. Yeah, but always it was within the Ministerio de Educación, so Education Minister. Yeah, so it was in charge of driving or conducting the bilingual education of 13 nationalities and language. So it was in terms of number of students, it was less than national the national the minister obligations about education, but in qualitative terms, the DNAIB was in charge of 13 nationalities. So it was a huge challenge because most of the indigenous nationalities didn't have any documents as to start education. So no grammars, no dictionaries, no educational resources, nothing. Just in Quechua and Shuar there were some resources, but the other nationalities, nothing, absolutely. And then the DNAIB had the challenge to produce educational resources for all these people by using their languages. So it was a huge task at hands of indigenous administrators. So so there is a legal frame, just to talk about the current situation of education. So there are a legal frame which recognizes the indigenous education and language and cultures in a good manner. So the Constitution has the idea of interculturality and bilingual education, indigenous education, everywhere. So it is just difficult to cite all of the ideas included in the constitutions, starting from the idea of summa causa and Pachamama, etc. And then there is the Ley Orgánica de Educación Intercultural, so it is the general law. So it was supposed that the whole education has to be intercultural. Yeah? And then the Ley Orgánica de Educación Superior, the organic law of higher education, is the same. So the idea of interculturality or supporting interculturality is everywhere. It's everywhere. So it's the best law regarding to bilingual education. And then the Ley Orgánica de Comunicación, it's the same thing. So the TV channels, newspapers, everything has to use the language, the indigenous languages. Yeah, so the legal frame is okay. So it is a poem to bilingual education. Yeah, there is some quotations here, but I have to run because the time is just coming out. So, so just to mention some ideas. So in the Constitution, so the Article 1 says Ecuador is defined as an intercultural and pluricultural state. The Article 2 establishes that the Spanish is the official language of Ecuador, and the Spanish, Quechua, and Shuar are official languages of intercultural relations. So what is this intercultural relation? So we need to think theoretically and practically, what is this? So other ancestral languages are of official use for its speakers in the regions they inhabit. So the state will respect and stimulate their conservation and use. And then in the section of collective rights, it says people has right to a free, intercultural, inclusive, diverse, and participatory communication in every social interaction. And then to develop and strengthen the system of bilingual educational, intercultural education from early stimulation to higher education, preserving the identities and methodologies of teaching and learning. So, like this, you can find a lot of things, a lot of statements, articles, which are mandatory actually for in any place. So the laws, the Constitution and the laws are mandatory. But in these cases, in Ecuador, nothing happened, as I will show you now. So the silent war against bilingual education. So in this context, it's very interesting, nice context. So the first idea related to education and bilingual education weakening in Ecuador is that the discourse of recuperation of the Rectoría Estatal de la Educación. So it's a kind of a state control or recuperation on the stewardship of education, right? It is supposed that the education were not in hands of the Minister of Education or of the state, but in hands of corporatist organizations. Yeah, yeah, and it was the media discourse just to declare war against the teachers union. Yeah, educators national union, the UNE. Yeah, and on the other hand, it was a war against organized social participation or influence on education. So, for example, the discourse of Rectoría Estatal of Education was used as to break the agreement between the Ministry of Education and the CONAIE, yeah, the largest organization in the country. Yeah, so there were many interventions by government and TV and the media in general just to discredit the indigenous organizations and their participation in education. Yeah, so it happens in the highest levels of the government and in the schools. So the people in charge of supervising, for example, the education in the schools, they are just neglecting any participation of the parents in the education because of the state are recuperating the Rectoría Estatal de Educación, de la educación. So there is so there is an intense media attacks to education, bilingual education authorities and organization leaders, discrediting the system in general, the curriculum system, the educational resources produced by bilingual teachers. For example, history, the area studies of history and the education was part of 2 or 3 national interventions by TV just to discredit this area because it was in the book it was mentioned that the CONAIE and the CONAIE was against the government, and the Correa said no, this book of history for schools are making a propaganda and behavior of CONAIE. So with this discourse that all of the educational resources produced in 20 years by indigenous professors and technicians from the bilingual education was just putting in the garbage. So this is one of the books. Yeah, it is part of a series of books. Yeah, it's practical orientations and guides to teach in the schools. And all of these books were just not used in the school systems anymore. So, and it is a really nice book. So, a part of the uses of the Quechua language, it has the equipment. The team who prepared these books were from different places of the country, and they did a very nice work collectively in creating, for example, a specialized lexicon for every knowledge area. So for social sciences, math, nature sciences, etc. So, and it is the best lexicons, yeah, available in this book. So I didn't see others. Yeah, so some it is a press conference. Yeah, the historical leaders defended the bilingual education. Yeah, it's in February 2008, and then there were a new institutional organization of the country. So the country was divided in 9 different regions. Yeah, and different regions and different zones. And there is a coordinations in there, and then there are some number of districts, 140 districts in the country, and then within the districts there are circuits, and then the schools are the individual unity within this system. Yeah, so in this system, the division of different jurisdictions just disappear. So there is not any more the educación hispana and educación bilingüe, which is fine, which is fine. But there is not any criteria, any different criteria to establish which schools need to be considered as a bilingual education. So even though there are 60% of indigenous children, for example, in the schools, it is just ignored because there is not any criteria. When the jurisdiction divide was just abandoned. So this is the number of the zones, districts, and circuits in the country. Yeah, so it started many years before, but in this government just was concreted this new model of administration. So there is, the government are just organizing the unidades educativas del milenio. Yeah, so it's the millennium, the schools of the millennium. So this is a very huge and monumental schools throughout the country. In this moment, there are 300 schools of millennium, so with more than 7 million of investments for each. Yeah. So this is the Millennium School in Rocafuerte, just in the Sucumbíos, in the Amazon. But so it is this project is focused especially in infrastructure and equipments. So the schools are full of computers, and everything you can imagine for being a good school. Infrastructures and equipment. But there is nothing about the teacher training, for example. So they are the same teacher, so many of them just fear to use the computers, for example. I was myself in some of the schools of the millennium, and teachers have very, very nice computer labs, but it is just saved in there because they don't know how to use it, or they use just to play or for elemental things. Yeah. So the training professors are not part of the official concerns. So in the schools of the millennium, textbooks. Yeah, so there is not any room for indigenous cultures or knowledge of language. So the textbooks are the same for all. For example, you see lengua y literatura, language and literature. So the intercultural, this is the concept of interculturality for the government. So you have indigenous peoples and Afro-American, Afro-Ecuadorian, and supposedly the mestizos. And the estudios sociales, the same thing. So it's a Quichua woman, and Montubio from the coast, and this is the same. It's a Sachila indigenous people from the coast. So a part of besides of this representation, so if you go to the contents, there is nothing, absolutely. So you can find something about Confucius or Platon or things like that, but nothing about indigenous cultures or knowledge. It is the same thing for the general basic education. So yeah, so you can see the schools of the millennium and other schools. Yeah, no room for indigenous language knowledge. So this is the curriculum or the courses they offer. So language and literature, math. Natural and social environment, natural sciences, social sciences, aesthetics education, physical education, foreign language, and optativa. Yeah, it's an optional course, and sometimes people can teach language, and ancestral language and culture as optativa. Yeah? And this is the standardized curriculum for all the schools. So there is nothing for indigenous people. So yeah, I found these books and this curriculum even in the more far away schools in the jungle of Amazon. So there is nothing for indigenous peoples. So there is a good perception by indigenous people. So ask the students and the professors, do you like to learn Quechua? So it's just to show, right? Yeah. So the students said Sumagta. It's very nice. So they like to learn in Quechua. Yeah, Sumagta. It's yeah, but we like it. And then the professors a little bit less. Yeah. And the author. So do you see this mana? So I don't like. Ashaya a little bit. Yeah, it makes happy, and it's yes, I want. So there is openness to learn the language. Yeah, but there is not professors or any political will as to support the learning of the language. So the schools of the millennium, so now there are 20,000 schools which are unidocentes or pluridocentes. So it means that one or less than 6 teachers per school. Yeah, so throughout the country. So it is a lot, so 20,000 schools. Yeah, so this is certainly a problem because one teacher has to teach to 6 grades. Yeah, one, 2 students for grades. So it is difficult. The quality is not good, but it is not as a president used to say that it is the escuelas de la pobreza. They were created by aims where the land, culture, and identity. So until this moment, there were some organizations, indigenous organizations, but subsumed within the leftist political parties, within the Socialist Party, Ecuadorian Party, and the Communist Social Party. And there was the more known organization of this period is the Federación Ecuatoriana de Indios, so the Ecuadorian Indian Federation, which was part of the Communist Party. But there were many tensions with leftist leaders. So, and then in this period when the law of agrarian reform came to practice, so the indigenous just organized themselves under different ideas than the leftist interests. So, in 70s, it was a period of agrarian reform and post-agrarian reform. So it was a very interesting period because the communities were freed, and there were other institutions working with communities as the Misión Andina, and the Summer Institute of Linguistics in the Amazon, and they were working with the communities, and it was feeding a process of ethnogenesis in the communities. And then the communities within the haciendas were able to rearticulate themselves and to move, to make contacts between or among communities, and even to travel to the coast in order to work and establish in there. So the first indigenous organizations mainly. So the core ideas of the new organizations, or the first indigenous organizations, was land, culture, and identity. So within these claims, the indigenous education, called the Kikin Yachay, the educación propia, right? Was highly desired, and it was part of the starting agenda of different organizations and different levels. So there were federal province federations, and the Ecuadorian, which was a highland regional organizations. It's Ecuador Una Conapa Richarimuy, which is the awakening of indigenous peoples of Ecuador. And then in the Amazon, the Federación Shuar, the Shuar Federation, and it was very early in the 1960s. Yeah, and all of these organizations were interested in education. So in the Shuar Federation, you have 5 institutos normales bilingües. So it is a kind of institutions in charge of educating young people for being teachers. Yeah. So institutos normales bilingües were created within the indigenous territories and indigenous communities. Yeah. It's the first time we have this kind of institution. So just to see, yes, this is the Instituto Normal Bilingüe, Jaime Roldós. It's located in the central Ecuador. Yeah, this is the Instituto Normal Bilingüe Quilloag in the southern Ecuador. Yeah, and Instituto Normal Canelos in northern Amazon. Instituto Normal Bomboiza, it's a Shuar people institute located in the southern Amazon. And then this is the Instituto Normal Marta Roldós. It's located in Limoncocha. It's in the middle of the jungle in the central Amazon. For example, they started in the very early in the 60s a huge project of education by using the radio. Yeah, with support of missionaries and Salesian missionaries and other missions located in the Amazon. So in 1979, there is what is called the return to democracy. So there were many dictatorships before this year, and then there are a political campaign in the country, and the indigenous organizations are very active in political negotiations with the presidential candidates. Yeah, what we're negotiating, yeah, especially the access to land and the bilingual education. Yeah, so Jaime Roldós won the elections, and very early in the 1980s,